for it was in 2017 when I was honored to address the Erie Masonic District investiture ceremony. In addition to eating enough chicken wings to last me a lifetime, my wife and I were provided a tour by Right Worshipful Brother Dan of the Masonic section of Forrest Lawn Cemetery. I was simply blown away. When Craftsman Online was started, I knew that this would be a story that needed to be told. I actually asked Brother Dan this past year if he would do it live on Halloween from Forrest Lawn Cemetery. I don't remember the exact reasons why he couldn't, something along the lines of ghosts and being scared. So from the safety behind locked doors with lots of garlic and crosses at the ready, I present Right Worshipful Brother Daniel Di Natale and Freemasonry in the City of Light. Brother Dan?
Good evening, brothers. I don't know how he knows what's exactly in my basement, but it's there. I am protected. I'm very excited to give this presentation. So I'm going to go through all the Forest Lawn and all that great stuff, but cemeteries aren't in order. I know it sounds weird, but people don't die in order and they don't get interred in order. So I've never been able to give this talk telling the contiguous history of the people that are buried there because they're scattered throughout this massive cemetery. So this is the first time that I'm going to be able to tell the story of Western New York Masonry, Buffalo Masonry, using the graves as a backdrop and be able to tell you a contiguous story connecting everything. So I really appreciate the Craftsman Online for inviting me back to speak, especially about a topic that honestly, I know it's weird, but I love giving this tour at Forest Lawn. And I love talking about the history of Western New York Masonry through the physical footprint that we've left over history. Stories in stone. This is the beautiful archway on the main entrance of the Delaware side of Forest Lawn Cemetery. This is the map of really the central downtown area of Buffalo, New York. A Buffalo lawyer, Charles E. Clark, recognized the need for a cemetery of substantial size to serve the city and its booming populations. What he had in mind was more than a burial ground. In 1849, he purchased land about 2.5 miles from city center in a vision. My French is horrible, but Père Lachaise, the world's most famous cemetery, which was established in Paris in 1804. This is what inspired Forest Lawn. It was originally located on a very rural section, and it was meant to invoke a balance of nature, but allowing the city to connect to it so that you would have that burgeoning growth that would surround a very idyllic, very pastoral grandeur of a park that happened to be a cemetery. In the United States, this is a wholly new thing. The first one that was built, it was in Mount Auburn in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1831. And again, Mount Auburn, just like the one in France and Forest Lawn, encouraged people to walk the grounds, admire the funerary art, and commune with the nature that surrounded them. So you see the little box there. That's Forest Lawn Cemetery, and you can see it adjacent, that green area. That's the Olmsted Park system. So the Forest Lawn Cemetery was considered part of that framework of the Olmsted Park system, which we're going to talk a little bit about. But the park, Delaware Park, is literally right above Forest Lawn. And then the Richardson Asylum is also part of that, which was a hotel. It recently shuttered, but it'll be back. But that was all part of this massive park project, which is one of the largest in the United States. I actually think it's still the largest. So Forest Lawn is about 300 acres of just incomparable beauty. There's about 161,000 people buried there. There isn't a Buffalo name that isn't attached to the cemetery, past or present. The first burial was in 1848, actually, of John Lay Jr. He was actually involved in the construction of the cemetery. Today, they wanted this to be more, again, than just a graveyard, which I know it sounds strange because especially in Western culture, the idea of a graveyard being like a place you'd go is kind of a strange thing. Um, Today, there are about 3,500 trees in Forest Lawn. There's about 100 different species. It's an animal sanctuary. It is home to the only waterfall in Buffalo city limits, all of about 4 inches of it. But it's a waterfall, it counts. There are 240 kinds of birds that have been spotted in Forest Lawn. There was a albino deer that lived there for a while. So there are countless birds, fauna, anything you can think of. This really was supposed to be built as a place to be much more than a graveyard. It was meant to be a park and a place not to just to enjoy the funerary art, but to remember in a much different way the grief of those that we've lost and really the immortality that exists after life. Forest Lawn is home. Where'd it go? There we go. Forest Lawn is home to many famous people. Rick James from Buffalo, 100% buried in Forest Lawn. It is paired by the Letchworth Memorial you see in the middle there, that like red building on the hill. That's Letchworth, like the Letchworth Park, Letchworths. That memorial is actually still a functioning mausoleum. It goes underground, I want to say 3 or 4 stories. And inside there's actually a sitting area so that when members of the Letchworth family pass and they give the service, it's actually given inside that. Forest Lawn runs a fundraiser, at least they have in the past, where they open that mausoleum up for a cocktail party, which again, I know sounds weird, but it's a really cool cocktail party. The other thing that's cool on here, if you just want to like talk a little general Buffalo history that weirdly connects back to Masonry, that stone monument you see with like the bell on top of it, that's the Bloker Memorial. He got rich and famous by designing something we all take for granted, left and right shoes. He came up with that idea because before that, shoes were shoes and they fit your feet. He came up with the idea of left and right shoes that had catered sizes, which was a huge seller and made him a very wealthy man. And we're actually going to talk about him and his connection to Masonry on a few slides. One of the other things too, that had nothing to do with Masonry, but something that's really just impressive about Forrest Lawn Cemetery. This is Blue Sky Mausoleum. This was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. It is the only funerary art designed by Wright. It was designed for use by the Darwin Martin family, the owner of the Larkin Soap Company. Unfortunately, this didn't get built because the Larkins in the Depression basically lost everything. And they were unable to build this mausoleum because the construction cost, even back then, I think the words ridiculous would probably be the way to describe it. The marble that Frank Lloyd Wright wanted sourced for this was incredibly difficult to get in the United States. I think it had to all be imported, and you're talking in a time in the 20s where that may have been kind of difficult. Also, the plot that was picked out, if you ever are in Forest Lawn and you go to where the Martins are buried, the plot is not big enough to hold this monument. There's no way it would have fit. So in 2004, the Forest Lawn Cemetery, I believe it's Forest Lawn Cemetery Memorial Corporation, actually was able to purchase the rights to the mausoleum and built it near the reflecting pool. You can still rent space if you're looking to. It costs you a couple $100,000 and you will be part of the most important part of funerary art built in this century. So if you ever come to our great city and you go to Forest Lawn, stop at Blue Sky because it is an incredible piece of architecture. So to give you an idea, this is Forest Lawn. So this is the tour map. So when you walk in either the gates or the main building, there's a little thing off to the side that has little flags or little posters in it. Take one of these because on the back of it, it'll tell you where all those numbers are, and will also tell you where different people are buried within the graveyard, so that you can take the walking tour, which is well worth your time. And if I'm around, give me a ring. I would love to give you a similar tour in person again. I love going to Forest Lawn. It's one of my favorite places in Buffalo. So, Freemasonry in the City of Light. So to connect all things back, I showed you that memorial with the bell on it, the Bloker Memorial. that mansion at the lower left of your screen where it says city, that's the Bloker mansion. It was purchased by the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite when the Blokers, they fell on some hard times after the Civil War, and I believe the company went bankrupt, and they had to sell off the assets. And the Scottish Rite actually bought his mansion, and it was called the Chapter House, and then bought the Episcopal Church next to it to make the Scottish Rite Cathedral. And that's actually would be located and now is City Center, where you would have the original city or the old City Hall, which is now the county building for the city of Buffalo. The other thing too about all the pictures that are on here is we are talking about graveyards. Not one of these buildings is either standing or occupied by Masons, which is it kind of bums me out because they're all cool buildings, but another program for another day. So since we're going on a tour, I got to show you the map. This is our map through time. We're going to be talking about the section of history through 1789 and 1919. Anything past 1919, it's a great story, but unfortunately, we're not going to be able to cover it tonight because we'd be here all day. And frankly, I cut down what I was going to talk about in 1718 to 1919 because it's just a lot. So before we get too deep into the meat of this, full disclosure, when we're talking about early Masonry in Western New York, a lot of the story is from oral tradition in Erie County. A lot of our early records, which we'll talk about, were destroyed or mismatched or just not kept well, and cause us to have to keep our history through strings of records that had nothing to do with Masonry, but through research, we were able to connect the dots and tell our story. So I have some mercy because some of this stuff I know can be kind of a stretch because we're trying to connect history through oral tradition, through old minute books, through old newspaper articles to tell the story of where Western New York, where Buffalo Freemasonry came from. So if something seems odd, write it down. I will be happy to answer the question after the presentation because there's probably a chunk of the story that I had to omit, or it's a piece of history that I don't know. And if you do, I'd love to hear it. So we've divided history, the story, if you will, to the pre-Morgan era, 1807 to 1825, the Morgan era, 1826 to 1844, the post-Morgan era, 1844 to 1919. And that's the end of our story, at least for today. Past that, we have the Depression era, the Boom era, the Consolidation era, and the Restoration era. This is all things that I came up with to describe Masonry and its story in Western New York. So let's get into the pre-Morgan era. Freemasonry finds itself in Western New York with really the very first settlers. And again, another disclosure, there's a chunk of this story that takes place in Canada, which I am not going to cover because that in itself is its own presentation. But know that early Freemasonry is deeply connected to our brothers in Canada. Buffalo at the time was pretty reliant on Fort Erie and the things that were going on around it. Because we were just a little town, and that was actually one of the major settlements was all over there and around the fort area. And then the forts that were scattered throughout that area. So keep that in mind, but we're not going to talk too much about it. So again, if it seems weird that that's not talked about, I'm telling you right now, I'm omitting it because it's just way too much history that would not get us to the whole of what's going on in Buffalo. So in 1679, LaSalle builds a ship, the Griffin, near the mouth of Cube Creek, and constructs Fort Conti at the mouth of Niagara. In 1784, the first European settlers arrived. Dutch investors, acting through the Holland Land Company, obtained land. And in 1797, as part of the Holland Purchase, they select and name New Amsterdam. But the settlers insist on Buffalo, which was a name adopted when Buffalo was incorporated as a town in 1810. How our great city ended up with this name is up to much speculation. Some say it originated from the French fur traders, calling the creek Buffleur, or Buffalo, meaning beautiful river. Others speculate that the name is derived from the Seneca's mention of bison migrating through the area that we call Western New York. There's really not a way to substantiate either of those stories, and I've always debated that there were bisons in Western New York, but I'll take it. But one thing I can tell you with 100% certainty, as they traveled here, there most surely were Masons. What we know of early Masonry and what will become Buffalo is scattered and fragmented. Many of the original sources are simply lost to time. Almost all relies on oral tradition, scant news clips, fragments from lodge minute books, and most notably the work of Brother M. Penner. Brother Penner's work is the only cohesive source remaining that ties the story of Masonry by those that were there firsthand. and in some capacity and at its formal founding. His work was written in 1884 as part of a 2-volume set called The History of Erie County, in which only a small section was supposed to cover Freemasonry and its history. But in true Masonic fashion, he went way over the page requirements. The section, which was much larger than planned for, was actually turned into its own book and was later published separately to the fraternity. The smaller part being published in the full 2-volume set, which covered not just fraternalism in Western or in Buffalo, but a lot of the early history of Western Buffalo and the city founding. All of Masonry is in Brother Penner's debt, as without him, we would have no clear understanding of our first and founding history and the dark days after the Morgan affair or our return in 1845. So if it wasn't for his book, and if it wasn't for him just writing too much, we would not have a clear understanding of what happened, because he really did give us all the primary sources that I'm using today, and frankly have used for a ton of other research about what has happened in Western New York. So like all good history, we're going to tell it through the story of individual people. It being Forrest Lawn, we're going to talk about some graves. So the first brother we're stopping at is Judge Zeneas Barker. He was the first master in Buffalo of Western Star Lodge number 239. Now, at the top of my slides, you're going to see the date range that we're in and then what was going on. So you're going to see in this time period between 1807 and 1825, there were 11 lodges warranted or chartered in Buffalo. Follow that because it's interesting. You're going to see different things happen through time as it trends. So what we know about Brother Barker and what we know about the Masons that were here. So what we know is that the Masons were formally meeting, according to some historical records, as early as 1807 in the village of New Amsterdam, Buffalo, New York. A group of Masons led by Judge Barker requested for dispensation to the Grand Lodge to meet as Western Star Lodge in the village of Clarence, in his home. What's interesting is that we recently discovered that that home still stands in Clarence. A gentleman emailed me looking for, had found my name on a presentation I was giving, and actually sent me information about his house. And in the, I guess we'd call it a living room today, but I think at the time it was a library, that was likely used as the first formal meeting space of Western Star Lodge, which is kind of cool. So the formation of Western Star Lodge came with a lot of difficulty. The first request sent to Grand Lodge in 1808, and this is as oral tradition tells us, it never arrived to Grand Lodge because highwaymen jumped the courier and robbed him of the fee money due to Grand Lodge. It would take about another 5 years for them to get themselves together in Buffalo to get the formal charter over, or formal request for a charter over. And it finally happens in September of 1812. Unfortunately, this is really horrible timing. The dispensation request is never acted upon because the War of 1812 breaks out in June 18th. The battles of the war would be fought right on the doorsteps of this budding frontier town. There was no hiding from the conflict. On December 30th, 1813, the village of Buffalo would be burned by the British. Of its 150 buildings, only 3 would be left standing. The stone jail, which the foundation of the stone jail was used to build the foundation of the Lafayette Hotel, which if you've ever been to Buffalo for the City Light Table Lodge, we've met there more than a few times. The blacksmith shop and the home of Margaret St. John. Of all of those, actually, the only one that's still around is the Lafayette Hotel. The other 2 buildings were torn down. The events of the war would prevent the lodge from forming and holding meetings in more ways than one. As the frontier conflict started, the need for defense was great. We take for granted that Buffalo is a city. In 1812, it was not a city. It was a village with isolated people surrounded by woods and danger on the edge of, for what early America was, really the edge of the wilderness, the edge of America. The early settlers were surrounded by enemies. The early Masons of Western New York were no stranger to hearing the calls of country, and their collective heroics would lead to a series of events leading to the first formal meeting of Western Star Lodge. One of the first people on the name, of course, named on this is Judge Barker. So the first master, Judge Zeneas Barker, was a veteran of the Revolution and found his way to Buffalo in 1804 from Connecticut to open a tavern located on Terrence and Main Street, which would become one of the very first ferry masters of Lake Erie. He was a driving force in the incorporation of the village and the city. The town of Barker is named after him. It's rumored that his bar may have been one of the first sites of Masonic meetings. There's not a way to confirm that. It's just a rumor. So that's Judge Barker. He is located near the Crystal Lake. He is in section 2, and you're going to see on the map where the little star is. So I will get my presentation notes to the Brothers of Craftsmen online, so you can print out the guide and you can wander the graveyard if you're ever here, and you can find each one of their graves. So that's Judge Parker, the first master of the first lodge in Western New York. Now we're going to talk about the first senior warden of the first lodge of Western New York, Colonel Serenius Chapin, MD. He is quite possibly my favorite early Mason in Western New York because his story is ridiculous. It's just, you wouldn't believe that it's true, but it is, because the same stories told by his enemies in Canada was the same with a different perspective, which is just incredible to me. So Brother Chapin was the first senior warden. He was a physician looking for adventure in the Niagara frontier. We believe he was born in Massachusetts around in February of 1796. After studying medicine under his brother, Dr. Caleb Chapin, he would move to Windfall, Vermont, and then find his way to practicing in Oneida County in New York, where he would remain until his move to Buffalo in 1801. He was one of the very first settlers in Buffalo and the first medical doctor in the area. His farm was located at a place called Chapin's Corner. So if you're in downtown Buffalo in front of the Seneca Tower, there's the old Marine Trust building. There's a plaque there. That is the corner of Chapin's farm. It actually was known as Chapin's Corner. It's a plaque remembering that he's there because he also founded the Buffalo Medical Association, well, what it would become. So at the start of the war, he would form a militia unit to defend the region. He would ascend through the ranks from captain to lieutenant colonel, making him one of the highest ranked officers in the region during the conflict. Colonel Chapin would be sent to Fort George, now known as Niagara-on-the-Lake, in 1813. While there, he organized a unit of mounted riflemen, gained notoriety from the English as kind of a pirate and a marauder. He would lead guerrilla raids and surprise attacks on enemy forces. His tactics were so impactful in the war that to this day, he is still referred to as a terrorist by the Canadians. And they still tell the story of how much they hate this guy to this day, with much rue and lament. On July the 12th, 1813, while leading his rifle unit under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Bulstrode at the Battle of Beaver Dam, the American forces were forced into a tenuous surrender. Chapin was captured along with his men and sent as prisoners of war to Kingston. Due to his reputation, he was placed under some heavy guard and being transported via boat across the lake. This would not be enough to stop the colonel. While in transport, he and his men organized, overthrew the British holding them, took captives on the ship, stole the ship, would then reverse course and go back to what is Fort Niagara, where they couldn't pilot the boat, so they careened it on the rocks and then swam to shore to continue to fight. This is one of his most notable acts. So then once we get to the burning of Black Rock, Colonel Chapin is kind of in an interesting spot. So now the city of Buffalo is getting burned. So the defense is made around what is today Niagara Square. He is brutally outnumbered. But the British have not figured out that the cannon that they looted technically doesn't work. So he buys the fleeing villagers enough time by forcing a parley with the British, which was really a joke. He's actually recorded in some historical accounts as kind of goading with the British and kind of saying, hey, let's talk about this. But really, he's just not. He's buying time for everybody to get out. So they get one shot off, according to the legend, with this cannon before it blows off its moorings, and the English figure out that it's not going to work. They end up kind of negotiating terms with him, but eventually they burn the village and they run off. He ends up getting captured though, and he is held for 9 months in Montreal. He would return to Buffalo and would be a surgeon at the military hospital stationed here. We're going to connect this back, but he was personal friends with Red Jacket, another Mason, and a famous orator who's buried in Forrest Lawn, which we're going to connect to his story in a little bit. After the war, Dr. Chapin would move around Western New York a bit, but he ends up in Buffalo in 1818 to live out the rest of his life pretty much in quiet private practice. He goes on to be remembered as one of our most important city fathers. He's a founder of the Erie County Medical Society in 1821, its first president. He returned to public life as a physician in a growing city, and in 1836 was honored by the citizens of Buffalo with a silver plate, thanking him for all he'd done. He would lead the local Federalist Party and was politically active in the city in some capacity until his death. He died on February 20th, 1838, and was afforded full military and Masonic honors. He and his wife Sylvia were originally buried in the graveyard where Old City Hall stands today, and they were moved during its construction, and they now rest eternally, Section 5 at Forrest Lawn. So if you go to find him, he's located adjacent to the Pierce Mausoleum. And then on that map that you see there is the original lots of New Amsterdam, but Buffalo, New York. An interesting, let's see here. I have an interesting quote from the Canadians that I recently found. So when he was basically when the parlay was breaking down and they were firing that shot off with the cannon, Chapin was reported to yell, "Every man for himself and the devil for us all," which I think is kind of fun. So in Canada, Chapin's name again is synonymous with destruction. And there's actually a British officer, I believe a Colonel Brown, quoted in his diary saying that all private property ever been and ever will be by me respected, no such man as Dr. Chapin will I hope to accompany in an army that honor his command. I'm sorry, it was an American colonel, not an English one. It's basically saying General Chapin was a looter and a marauder, and even his own side didn't quite want him in their service. So that's why I love his story. He is the first senior warden of the First Lodge in Buffalo, New York. To our junior warden, Frederick Miller. So Frederick Miller comes to Black Rock, the first licensed ferry operator, Black Rock Ferry, where he ran a tavern, also rumored to have held Masonic communications of some kind. In 1812, he would purchase the Cold Spring Tavern, which would later become Miller's Tavern at Ferry and Main Street. It was a very popular spot for travelers and soldiers alike, wink, wink. The list of heroic actors does not stop with Chapin and goes as far as our junior warden. He served in the War of 1812. Before the war, like Barker, he ran a bar. And then he was also a veteran of the Revolution, and he ran an artillery unit that was stationed around the Black Rock area. So he too was an officer and a leader during the War of 1812. So that is the story of the First Lodge and its first senior officers. Now the story continues because they didn't have a meeting yet. They never formally operated until December the 7th, 1814. This was the backdrop that the Masonic community finds itself after the completion of the war. The craft was stacked, not only with frontiersmen and city fathers, but with patriots that sacrificed everything that they could in the wilderness to build a home. So they weren't able to meet. And on December 7th, 1814, our Grand Master and the governor of New York, the most worshipful DeWitt Clinton, ordered Western Star Lodge to be chartered and their dues to be waived in commemoration for what had happened to the people of Buffalo and the heroic actions of the founding members. A motion that was unanimously voted on. The minutes of Grand Lodge state, resolve that a warrant do issue to the said brethren and all dues under the dispensation be relinquished. On December the 24th, 1814, Western Star Lodge number 239 received its charter, becoming the first Masonic Lodge in Buffalo. Now, you're going to see these jewels on your screen. The square, the compass, the square, the master square, the level, and the plumb. These jewels were presented by Most Worshipful DeWitt Clinton to Western Star Lodge number 239 in 1815. Those jewels were worn by Judge Barker, by Serenius Chapin, and by Brother Miller. They are some of the oldest Masonic objects in Western New York. And the story of their epic nature does not end here. We're going to come back and talk about these because these jewels have taken a trip and are incredibly important. But for now, just know that our founding fathers of Masonry in Western New York have these jewels, and they're still poking around to this day. So this brings us sort of to the end of things, at least in this era. By the end of the War of 1812, Masonry explodes in Buffalo, much like much like the city would. Freemasonry will flourish as the city grows. Between the founding of Western Star in 1825, 11 lodges were warranted or chartered. The influx of people following the wealth of the Erie Canal would in time grow the city into one of the largest in the country. By 1830, the census of Buffalo's population was close to 9,000 people. By the 1840s, the census was almost 19,000 people. In a decade, the city had more than doubled. With so many people in such a short period of time, it's no surprise that Freemasonry would grow just as rapidly. Like all things, there is more than just what is happening in one growing metropolitan area. There are factors and social forces that affect our daily lives. Freemasonry does not exist in a bubble. The hard fact that Masons of Western New York know all too well, as by 1830, by 1835, really, not one of these lodges was operating in the city. They wouldn't be operating for almost a decade, all because of the actions of one man, Captain William Morgan. The events that would unfold would forever change Freemasonry, not just in Buffalo, but across New York State, and really across the United States. It would change the very face of the craft and the world over, and the very course of history for Buffalo Masonry and Masonry in the state of New York. This brings us to the Morgan era. So buried in Forrest Lawn is a president who connects all of this together. We're not going to talk too much about the details of like Millard Fillmore's political career, but I'm going to tell you how it all kind of connects to the Morgan affair because he was involved in it. So the Morgan affair happened September the 12th, 1825. The formation of the Anti-Masonic Party happens in about February 1828. Western Star Lodge forfeits its charter, the last to do so in 1835. The Anti-Masonic Party joins the Whigs. They disillusion in 1838. And then Hiram Lodge forms in 1844, late 1844, and get their charter in 1845. So this isn't a huge period of time, but man, does stuff go sideways on us in a 20-year span. Let's talk about the Morgan affair, because you cannot talk about Western New York's history without understanding what happened. Throughout history, there are seminal moments that change the course of everything that comes after it. For Freemasonry in the United States, and especially in New York, that moment is the Morgan affair. There is a context to the events leading up to and ultimately after that glean a deeper insight as to why and how such a thing could have happened. We won't get too crazy in the weeds, but I'm going to tell you a few stories about what this did to Western New York. So the Masonic fraternity has had many detractors over its 300 some years of organized operation all over the world. Some fear Masons because they feel it's a cult or a false religious movement, that Freemasons are actively trying to take over governments or seek to build their own. These fears are all ill-placed. As Masons, we know it's not a religion, nor does it seek to replace it. Members of the craft are encouraged to pick a faith of their choosing and follow it. As for government involvement, Masons are encouraged to follow their government and let judgment laid down by those who are selected to pass that judgment. Freemasonry, like all organizations, is built by men, is prone to flaws and the trappings of human arrogance. Contextually, after the Revolution over the English and the War of 1812, Freemasonry was viewed by the average citizen as something very pro-American. Some of those notable founding fathers having been members. After the Revolution, Masonry saw huge growth in membership. The men making up the craft at that time, for good or for bad, had deep influence over the forming of the American experiment. Not to say that Freemasonry was not an active and vibrant part of the colonies as much as it was, but it was very much a different role in the new American consciousness after the Revolution. Freemasonry was not a secret, and its role in America was very well known. As the country grew, Masons took more and more central role in the society, and the fraternity gained prestige and disdain. The common Masonic oral tradition tells us a tale that it was not uncommon when going to trial that the jury, the judge, and the accused might all be Masons. Thus, justice might have been a tad lesser on the guilty. Business deals affecting whole communities were made at the dinner table of lodge rooms. Rumored even at outcomes of local elections decided at the toast of a festive board. True or not, these rumors and perceptions were part of a growing distrust for Freemasonry. By the 1820s, many political and religious organizations were openly criticizing and attacking the craft. Little came of it, though, and that's at least as until the Morgan affair. So, who is Captain William Morgan, and what really happened? History is going to tell you a few stories. He was a Mason. He was a hero, a martyr, a liar, a snake oil salesman. Honestly, it's really going to depend on what side of history you choose to believe. So, Morgan was born in Culpeper, Virginia in August of 1774. He said he served with honors in the War of 1812 and reached the rank of captain. There is little evidence to support his claim. Names matching his appear on the rolls of the Virginia militia, none of which ever made it to captain. He moved to Batavia, New York, where he lived between 1824 and 1826. He moved from Upper York, Canada, today modern Toronto, to Batavia after his brewery burned down and he was left in destitution. Returning to the United States, he relied on old skills, being a bricklayer by trade. He reported himself to be a Mason to those in the community. Historically, there's no record to support his membership in craft Masonry. This is important because he technically was a member of another body. Records left from that time period suggest that his regularity was in question from the very first moments he said he was a Mason. The only Masonic degree we know he received was his Royal Arch degrees, a concordant body, of course, for Master Masons, at Western Star Chapter Royal Arch Masons number 33 of Leroy in 1825. As a member, he kind of gained by swindling his way into the meeting. He even persuaded a friend and former employer to allow him into Rochester Lodge, as stated by, and this is a quote by Judge Ebenezer Mix of Batavia, who kind of oversaw all the things that were happening with us. And I quote, "There must have been a most reprehensible lax amongst the Masons of both Rochester and Leroy, for there was no evidence induced that or afterwards that he was ever received any Masonic degree, save that Royal Arch on May the 31st, 1825 at Leroy." We know that bad blood started to form between Morgan and the Masonic community pretty quickly. We know that Morgan applied for a copyright for a Masonic exposure. That's a book that tells the secrets of the Masonic ritual, something that was very common in Europe, but had not yet happened here in the United States. It was feared that the exposure, if it was successful, that the craft would die out, having the secrets publicly exposed. The brothers in Batavia felt that this exposure needed to be stopped. And it was at this point, the story takes two roads. And one which works against Freemasonry, one that works for it. Both have evidence to support their historical claims to the event. So let's tell the story. On September 11th, 1826, Morgan was arrested for failing to pay back a loan and a theft in shirt and tie. I believe it was actually a shirt collar. He was held in the farmhouse in Canandaigua, used to detain prisoners on their way to a more formal jail. Under law, he could be detained in debtor's prison until the debt was paid in full to those he owed. That evening, his debt was mysteriously paid, and he was released under duress. Under abduction, was taken to Fort Niagara, never to be seen again. It was not too difficult to discover that the Masons were involved. 3 members of the craft, Brother Cheesebro, Lawrence, and Sawyer, pled guilty to a conspiracy to seize and secret Morgan, and together with Eli Bruce, Sheriff, and John Whitney, all served terms in prison for the offense. But murder was never proven, as no body was found. Well, that was until about 1827. A body was found washed on the shores of the Niagara, which Morgan's wife identified as her husband. The problem was the body, even horribly decomposed, was found to have a dark, long beard and a full head of hair. Morgan, the night of his abduction, was clean shaved and he was bald. Adding more confusion as to the identity of the body, his wife, the wife of a Canadian named Timothy Monroe, positively identified the clothing as to which had been worn by her husband at the time of the disappearance. So there's conflict as to the identity of the body. Thurlow Weed, the editor of the Rochester Telegraph, remembered as a sensationalist and opportunist and a political kingmaker, was accused of having the body he was accused of having the body shaved and white hair placed to make it look more like Morgan. There's not a ton of evidence to support that, but it's a good story. Truth not being as important as the story was already being told and the nation over from what was reported in his paper. Weed died in 1822 and on his deathbed confessed that he had spoken with John Whitney in 1860 and he had confessed to the murder of Morgan by dropping him in the lake weighed by Lake Niagara or Lake Erie by heavy chains. He stated that Whitney was going to sign the confession but died before he was able. The issue is Whitney had died 9 years before the reported confession to Weed, so that probably didn't happen. The second story involves Brother Whitney. And it does indeed confess to the actions of September the 12th to Brother Robert Morris. Whitney told Morris that he had consulted with DeWitt Clinton and Albany and what would be done to prevent Morgan from printing his exposure. Clinton would not allow any illegal moves, but suggested the purchase of Morgan's manuscript for enough money to enable Morgan to move beyond the reaches of influence and the probable enmity of his associates in the publishing enterprise. Morgan had, of course, promised a great profit from the sale of this book. From Masonic oral tradition, up to $1,000 was authorized by Dewitt Clinton. That's about $40,000 in today's money. In Batavia, Whitney summoned Morgan to a conference in which the offer was extended. On one hand, persecution and continued harassment and an untrusted social pariah. Granted, it is not improbable that threats were mixed with this offer. On the other hand, money, safety, and a clean start if Morgan would take the money and go to Canada and just disappear. His family would be provided for and then later sent to him. According to the story, Morgan agreed. He was arrested, kidnapped, to make it easy for him to get away from Miller and his associates and the publishing company. Basically, he said he was going to make a whole bunch of money for. Whitney feared without some such escape, Morgan at the last moment might decline to go through the plan. Basically, looking for you're forced to do this type thing, and fearing, of course, reprisal from the publishers. So this would have given him a clean break and a cover story. Whitney told Morris that 2 Canadian Masons received Morgan from his kidnappers at Fort Niagara, traveled with him a day and placed him near Hamilton, Ontario, where they paid him the money, received his receipt, signed an agreement never to return without permission of Colonel William King, Sheriff Bruce, or Whitney. The story goes on that after being brought to Canada, he simply disappeared with the money. He never contacted Whitney for the rest of it. Oh, he was only paid half. He was only paid $500. And he simply disappeared and never contacted his family. This disappearance raises suspicions about the events and allows for misinformation to spread, mostly through Thurlow-Weed's sensationalization of the story. And of course, the legend of the murderer is born. No matter which story you accept, the fallout of the Morgan affair would be felt for generations of Masons, especially in New York. There are members today that believe we still never fully recovered from the damage done. Gould, in his History of Freemasonry, epitomizes the spirit of the time. And I quote, "The country has seen fierce and bitter political contests, but no other has approached the bitterness of this campaign against the Masons. No society, civil, military, or religious, escaped its influence. No retaliation of family or friends was barred from it. The hatred of Masonry was carried everywhere, and there was no retreat so sacred that it did not enter. Not only were teachers and pastors driven from their stations, but the children of Masons were excluded from schools, and members from their churches. The sacrament was refused to by Masons by formal vote of the church from no other offense than their Masonic connection. Families were divided. Brother was arrayed against brother, father against son, and even wives against their husbands. Desperate efforts were made to take away charter rights from Masonic corporations and to pass laws that prevent Masons from holding their meetings and performing their ceremonies. Even in this environment, anti-Masonry flourished in the United States, culminating in the formation of the Anti-Masonic Party. Thurlow-Weed, outside of a newspaper owner, was one of the leaders and the founders of the Anti-Masonic Party. Historically, they were the first third-party option on a single-line party founded in the United States, which I guess makes them fun. The party nominated many officials into office. Weed, a skilled politician, never took office, preferring to work in the background and publish his papers. He took part in the Anti-Masonic Party, Weed being very influential, getting President Zachary Taylor elected, whom after his sudden death was succeeded by Millard Fillmore. Fillmore, buried in Section F of the graveyard in a Buffalo native, is the only successful elected official for the party in 1828 as a New York State Assemblyman. All others supported to get elected kind of failed to get into office, and the way it worked was different, but he was the first. Though the party organized itself as speaking out on Masonic conspiracy against the common man at a political level, was a movement against President Jackson, president from 1829 to 1837, a well-known Mason, and his style of Jacksonian government and personal demeanor left much room for contention well outside of the bounds of his Masonic membership. Simply put, the Morgan affair was a catalyst for an already forming political movement and used as a tool against President Jackson and all those aligned with him. Like all one-issue parties, they quickly lost steam, lasting only about 10 years, and as a functional political movement. Politics seems never really changed, and the public simply lost interest in the anti-Masonic sentiment. The party would splinter and eventually join the Whigs, and some of them actually went off to, in time, become the Prohibitionists, proving that they were just never fun. So in 1845, James Polk was elected president, the first Masonic president after the Morgan affair, some 20 years later. But what the Morgan Affair did accomplish was collectively destroying Freemasonry on the western side of New York State. 11 lodges were warranted and chartered, but by 1835, not one of them was operating. It would take until 1845, almost a decade without lodge operating, sort of, for Hiram Lodge to open and bring Masonic practice back into the city. So that is why we bring up Millard Fillmore, because he connects this entire story. Also, oddly enough, one of the first Masonic meeting places in the city of Buffalo was around his campaign office, which is weird. Kind of all things connect. This is the list of lodges in Western New York. Western Star forfeiting its charter in 1835, and then goes through the list of those lodges that were founded. Again, by 1835, there's nothing left in Western New York. Everything is shuttered, except for Niagara Chapter 71 Royal Arch Masons. We have some record that they were operating, maybe not as a Royal Arch chapter, but in some kind of formal Masonic connection, which is weird because even today with everything that's going on with the pandemic, Royal Arch in Western New York never really stopped functioning. In some capacity it operated. So it just kind of shows that history never changes. So let's get past Morgan. I said I was going to get back to the jewels. So these are the jewels of Western Star Lodge number 239. During the crazy anti-Masonic fervor, some of the buildings in Western New York were rumored to have been raided and burned and all sorts of other bad things. Dr. Clark, who's not connected to Forrest Lawn, is another brother, we'll just say reappropriated the jewels from Western Star Lodge and got them out of the building and kept them safe. In one of these fires, the square from the altar was separated from the whole set. You can actually still see the singe marks on it if you look close. Brother Clark in the 1840s was in a lodge in Michigan, and somehow that square was in their trophy case where he reclaimed it. When Western Star Lodge, when Hiram Lodge number 105 starts back up in 1845, he presents the jewels to them again. Complete set with the altar square and compasses, which had not been complete since really 1835. They have their first meeting with the first jewels in Western New York, and Masonry is whole again. They have their first communication, which is pretty amazing. So in this time period, in the post-Morgan era, 1844 to 1919, there are 33 lodges chartered. The story that we're going to talk about in this time period is the forming of Hiram Lodge, the Civil War era, because there's always cool Civil War stories, and then the Pan-American Exposition in 1901, because it's just a huge event in Western New York. We're also going to talk about some immigrant communities in Buffalo, New York, because we can't talk about Buffalo without talking about the effects of immigrant communities. And we're going to talk about the German community. Why? I come from a German lodge. I know I'm horribly biased, but I'm going to tell you the story of them because I think it's amazing. Buffalo had many immigrant-based lodges. There were Irish lodges, Scottish lodges, Polish lodges, never an Italian lodge, and I'm Italian, that hurts my feelings. But there are also German Royal Arch chapters. So there was a lot of immigrant movement in our community that deeply impressed itself upon Freemasonry in Western New York. So let's tell the story of the post-Morgan era. Let's talk about the reforming of Masonry in Buffalo. And we're going to tell that story through Major General Nelson Randall, the first Grand Master from Buffalo, New York. So he was born in 1801 in Herkimer, New York. He would move to Buffalo, New York and work as a shoe dealer. He would be appointed the coroner of Buffalo, but his real professional distinction comes from military service during the Civil War. Major General Randall was placed in command of the 8th Division New York National Guard for the Civil War. Under his command was the 65th, 67th, 68th, and 74th New York State Militia, later known as the National Guard in New York. Fun thing, the 74th still operates out of Buffalo to this day. They would muster out of Buffalo, Elmira, and other local communities to march on Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for their term of service. The 74th Regiment of the New York State Militia during the Civil War furnished to the country nearly 300 officers and 1,000 fighting men. The regiment received authority to place silver rings on the lances of its colors, engraved as following. One on the national color, Gettysburg Campaign, 1863, November, December, 1863, state color, draft riots, Negro riots, the Fenian invasion of Canada, which is an amazing story in 1866. Hornsville, 1877. And today you'd also know them from their famous Buffalo location, the Connecticut Street Armory, the home of the 74th Regiment, where they are still active today serving our community. Major General or General Randall's Masonic service is no less impressive. He was initiated at Western Star Lodge number 239, first lodge in Buffalo in 1824. The fervor of anti-masonry caused this lodge, like all in Erie, to close until 1844 with the opening of Hiram Lodge number 105. On this request for charter, there are 3 names on the first lodge, first Reformed Lodge in Buffalo, one of which is Randall's. On December the 26th, 1845, he was elected senior warden and then served as master in 1847 and 1848. On June 15th, 1849, he served as the representative to Hiram Lodge to the Grand Lodge of the state of New York for the annual session. And 3 months later, August the 8th, he was elected junior Grand Warden. On October 21st, 1849, he was the charter member of the petition to form Erie Lodge number 161, Buffalo, New York. It's actually my mother lodge. He served as the first master of this lodge at the same time he was serving as deputy Grand Master. He was also elected Grand Master in 1851, serving 1 term. He is at that time, the highest ranked member of the Masonic fraternity from Buffalo. As Grand Master, Randall donated the memorial stone to the Washington Monument at the landing. So there's pictures of this. You can actually see it. So the doorway that leads into the Washington Memorial, there's a giant stone above the doorway. It reads, the Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of the State of New York, Nelson Randall, Grand Master, William Milner, Ezra S. Bomber, Finley M. King Committee. He donated this massive stone to support the construction of the Washington Memorial, which has a crazy story attached to it as well that we as a fraternity are attached to, but know that our Grand Master from Buffalo made that stone happen. The cornerstone, of course, of the Washington Monument was laid by a Masonic ceremony July the 4th, 1848. He would only serve 1 term as Grand Master due to the schism of 1849's growing effect. During this period of history, a divide that spiraled into the Grand Lodge, breaking them into pieces, mostly upstate and downstate due to feelings of unfair representation on the floor of Grand Lodge. This may be one of the factors that found Grand Master Randall into the Grand East in general to help ease the tensions. And it was hoped that he would bring harmony and heal the divide. Actually, it was kind of the opposite. Story is that he got pretty frustrated with the whole thing, had a really upset speech at the floor of Grand Lodge, and left and came to Buffalo to kind of like wait out his term because he was just so sickened with the situation. So sort of the opposite thing happened. So then after being Grand Master, he returned to Buffalo life. He would pass away March 25th, 1864, and be laid to rest in Forrest Lawn Cemetery, Section B, located right at the Y at the overgrown vault wall. It was the first tumulus built on Forest Lawn, or at Forest Lawn. At the time, it was built in a wooden grove. Right now, it's basically at the intersection of a street. We actually lost his grave. We couldn't find him. The original structure that was built there was a magnificent Gothic cathedral made out of cast iron, which at the time was like making it out of blocks of gold. Problem is, Buffalo winters eat steel, and the wheels of time turn this beautiful memorial into a great big rusty disaster, and they had to tear it down. To make it even worse, the tomb that he was buried in got crushed in due to the snow of the winters and basically caved it in like a tin can. The Forrest Lawn Cemetery maintenance people put up a wall and salvaged the names of the original families buried there, Randall, Candler, and Macy. Of the only original parts of that structure are those names. And he's actually not even listed on the directory. He's near impossible to find. We found him on accident when we wondered what was on behind the ivy. We thought it was like a directory, like a map of the park. It's not, it's his tomb. So now we found him again, which is great. So it is the resting place of our first Grand Master and one of the leading forces of the reestablishment of Freemasonry in Buffalo, New York after the Morgan Affair. So let's talk about the second lodge formed in Western New York, let's talk about German Freemasonry and how important it was to Buffalo. Anytime you see that logo at the top where it says Harmony Lodge number 699, 150, that's because it's my lodge's 150th anniversary, and the person on the screen is a member of my lodge. So again, sorry for the bias, but our stories are great and I want to share them with you. So the history of Harmony Lodge is closely tied to the growth and transformation of the city and region of Buffalo, New York. Within 1825's opening of the Erie Canal, and this spurred fast growth to the city of Buffalo. Men and women from across the country and really all over the world came to live and work. The city of Buffalo especially attracted German immigrants, who by the 1840s made up 1/3 of the city's population, the largest foreign-born immigrant group in the city of Buffalo. In 1848, the Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of the state of New York granted a dispensation to form the first German-American lodge in Buffalo, known as Concordia Lodge number 143. Concordia Lodge's charter was granted June the 13th, 1849. In July 1854, a charter was granted the second German-American lodge in Buffalo, Modestia, number 340. Despite the tribulations suffered by much of the nation during the American Civil War, the city of Buffalo grew and expanded during the 1860s. Abraham Lincoln visited Buffalo February the 16th, 1861, and the Civil War years saw an increase in the population of Buffalo from 81,000 to 94,000 by 1865. And in 1868, construction of Frederick Law Olmsted's public park system began in the city, creating the United States' oldest connected system of recreational space and parkways. That's where Forrest Lawn is a part of it. During this time of prosperity, 17 brothers from Modestia and Concordia decided to form a third German-speaking lodge in the city of Buffalo. Dispensation was granted by the Grand Lodge on November the 30th, 1869 to form Harmony 699, which was named after the Greek goddess of harmony, Harmonia. The last of the drei Schwesters, my German is not good, or three sisters, a name given to the three German lodges of Buffalo, was born. Interestingly, each of the lodges drew their names from Greek or Roman goddesses related to one another that also held traits related to a civil society. Concordia, from the Roman goddess of the same name, she represented respect in society or social concord found in free exchange of a republic. Modestia takes its name from Adios, the Greek goddess of modesty, more specifically of respect, humility, and reverence needed to understand your fellow men in their different stations of life. Harmony takes from the Greek goddess of the same, the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, who was thought to bring peace and balance after conflict with a mix of compassion and soothing of discord, appropriate as the founding of Harmony is only 5 years after the end of the Civil War. Harmony is the Greek forebearer of Concordia. She's also related to the harmony found in music, which in the story of Harmony Lodge is a huge deal because many of our members were members of the Orpheus Choir, which was a huge German choir, and the Straumbund Society. They did same thing. It was like another German musical group, and they were huge in the city of Buffalo. And Harmony, you pretty much had to be in one of those groups to be a member of Harmony in the beginning, which was pretty interesting. They had such a musical connection. The first meeting under dispensation was held December the 15th, 1869, over Charles Lady Apparel Store, located in 1460 Main Street, south of Court Street in Buffalo. This building later became known as the C.A. Weed and Company's place of business and was eventually torn down to be the home of the Liberty National Bank, known today as the Liberty Building. The first candidates initiated Freemason at Harmony Lodge on January 15th, 1870 were Brother Bernhard F. Wenrich, William Yeager, and Wilners Neubach, and Henry D. Zittel. The charter from Harmony Lodge was finally granted June 13, 1870. So the grave we're looking at here is Sebastian Keen. He is the first master of Harmony Lodge number 699 and a true player in the Buffalo German community. We don't know a ton about him personally. We do know a lot about his business affairs and then the success of his children. We know that he immigrated to the United States in 1855 from Germany with his significant other, Lena Baccarat. He would later marry her after arriving in Buffalo. He was a tinsmith by trade, but would open a chain of grocery stores, the first in Buffalo. The first of which was located at 562 Seneca Street in Buffalo, New York. The building has since been demolished. I believe that's the site of where the HSBC or the Seneca One Tower is now. His stores remained in operation until after 1884. He would have 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. His son, Hugo S. Keen, will go on to be a very successful attorney and politician in Erie County in New York State. Of his Masonic career, we know a ton. He was made a Mason in Concordia Lodge number 143 in Buffalo, New York. He was a very accomplished and distinguished member, being part of many cornerstone layings in Buffalo and founding 2 Masonic organizations that would operate using German: Harmony Lodge number 699 and Germania chapter number 256, Royal Arch Masons. He would make his defining marks really in the Royal Arch community after his tenure at Concordia and Harmony Lodge. He would serve under Most Worshipful DeWitt Clinton, at the time most worshipful Christopher G. Fox, at the time most excellent Christopher G. Fox, while he was Grand High Priest of New York. He would serve as High Priest of Germania chapter Germania chapter for 3 terms, and at least twice as secretary. He was one of the marshals that welcomed the Grand Chapter to Buffalo in 1877, the first time it had come to Buffalo. It was, at the time, I don't believe it was called a triennial, but it was the same idea. He was a member of Lake Erie Commandery number 20, though the dates are unknown of his membership in service. He passed on September the 8th, 1880, and was laid to rest September the 12th with full Masonic honors at Forrest Lawn Cemetery. In all descriptions of his Masonic service, it was attended by hundreds, speaking to the character and influence of this great Mason. So on the screen, you see, of course, a picture of Brother Keene. You see his family marker. It's pretty impressive. You also see an apron and a jewel. That's his apron and the same master's jewel he's wearing in the picture. So I was cleaning out a locker at the lodge, I don't know, 15 years ago. And in a garbage bag, there were a bunch of blackened jewels and a bunch of what I thought were just rags that they were wrapped up in. Turned out to be the officers' aprons from 1870 and the original jewels of Harmony Lodge. We still have all the jewels and the aprons. We crack them out for special occasions, like our 150th anniversary, which we're going to be doing this year. And other installation and other special events. So they're actually made by our brother, our junior warden, Brother Yingling, first junior warden. So cool story, cool historic item, epic tale about German Masonry. Let's talk about the Civil War. So Buffalo has no shortage of Civil War heroes, but we're going to talk about 2 of them. We're going to talk about General Bidwell, and then we're going to talk about Captain Wenrich. So Captain Wenrich is located at the bottom with the beard, or I'm sorry, Wildrich, with the beard and the banner, and then of course the Harmony logo because he's a member. So he was born in Germany. In the Civil War, he was the captain of the 1st Battery, 1st New York Light Artillery, Wadrich's Battery, and was later lieutenant colonel of the 15th New York Heavy Artillery. He immigrated to the U.S. in 1837, settling in a German community in Buffalo, New York. In 1841, he joined the state militia, serving as an artillery company attached to the 65th New York State Militia. By the late 1850s, he held the rank of major and entered politics. In 1860, he became the co-publisher of the Buffalo Free Press. It's in German, a daily German language newspaper, and was elected the tax collector of the city of Buffalo in November. He was mustered as a captain of the 1st New York Light Artillery Battery on August the 30th, 1861. Michael Wenrich would lead the battery at the Battle of Cross Keys, Second Bull Run, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg. He was actually dead center of the angle. They were transferred and later participated in the Chattanooga campaign in October and November of 1863. In early 1864, he was commissioned to lieutenant colonel in the 5th New York Heavy Artillery. By June, he was commanding the regiment outside of Petersburg, serving with the infantry in the 5th Army Corps. A flesh wound would take him at the Globe Tavern, and would take him as his first wound. He was then more seriously wounded in 1865, suffering a gunshot to his right arm, and was subsequently discharged for disability. On October the 13th, 1865, he was brevetted colonel of the U.S. Volunteers for gallant and meritorious service in the battles on the Weldon Railroad in Virginia. Following the war, he entered into the insurance business and was reelected Buffalo's receiver of taxes for 2 terms from 1866 and 1867. He worked for the German Fire Insurance Company of New York, building the firm in 1866 and later co-managing the branch. 1869, he was elected as assessor for the Internal Revenue. Wenrich is also a Freemason and an influential member of the Independent Order of Oddfellows. Stuttgart Encampment number 70. They were also operated in German tongue, as well as a prominent member of the Republican Party in Erie County. A member of Bidwell Post number 9, Grand Army of the Republic, He was active in veteran affairs, and a monument was erected in East Cemetery Hill in Gettysburg in 1889 to dedicate the battery. He would die a decade later at age 78. What's interesting with the battery is that he was actually one of the first units to build a memorial at Gettysburg that kind of started that whole memorial laying there. There's a book about it, about the regiment you can get from the Buffalo and Erie County Library that talks about the building of the monument and the historic and heroic nature of that unit. The next is Civil War Brigadier General. Ooh, that's Daniel Bidwell. He's right there, the guy with mutton chops. He was instrumental, kind of like the Teddy Roosevelt of Buffalo, in forming the first City of Buffalo police force. At the start of the war, he helped raise the 49th New York Volunteers and was named its colonel in October 1861. He commanded the 49th New York throughout all its engagements, and General Meade personally recommended his promotion to Brigadier General in 1864. On October 19th, 1864, at the Battle of Cedar Creek, Virginia, General Bidwell was mortally wounded in action and died in service. His family owned the Black Rock shipyards, which helped provide ships really all the way back to 1812. And again, he helped establish what would become the Buffalo Police. He has two monuments in Forrest Lawn. One is just a monument to him in the unit. And then, of course, the other one is his burial spot. Bidwell is located Section 8. It's like right near the path when you come up. And then Colonel Wenrich is Section DD, Lot 17. I've been to his grave, and I can't remember the exact detailed directions of how to get there, but I believe it's a little bit off the path. So that's a little bit of the historic German connection, of course, to the Civil War, and then the Civil War heroes of early reestablished Buffalo. So in the post-Morgan era, we have the actual dedication of Forrest Lawn Cemetery. Much of the history surrounding Forrest Lawn Cemetery connects to Section 13, the largest private plot on the grounds. It was founded by the Masonic Board of Relief in 1889. The Masonic Board of Relief was founded in 1858 and is the oldest contiguous Masonic organization in Erie County. Its original purpose was to help indigent Masons and those who had passed to have proper internment, which was something that happened. I mean, it was impossible to transport a body back then. So they would inter them into a Masonic cemetery so that a brother would be given the dignity of burial. They also did Masonic aid here in Western New York. The board eventually merged with the Masonic Service Bureau, which is no longer operating and now operates under a different sub-organization. So Section 13 is prime property. It is the main Delaware gate coming into Forrest Lawn next to the administration building. The graves surrounding the monument, so you see that road graves, were part of a transplant from another Masonic graveyard that was located at City Center. That's where Serenius Chapin was buried and relocated to Forrest Lawn. That's now where old City Hall stands, now the Erie County building. So this section is one of the largest private sections, again, found in Forrest Lawn. The memorial itself is a giant, I mean, the picture doesn't give it credit. It's a huge plinth. And it is one of the largest sections of Forrest Lawn. Part of that oral tradition is that when Forrest Lawn was starting, of course, they were looking for people to acquire space. So the fraternity acquired the largest space, which actually gave the Forrest Lawn a lot of the operating capital that allowed it to establish itself as a part of the Western New York Buffalo community. Urban legend, but there's some records on our side that show that's what happened. One of the key factors there was Brother Henry Zip, who was buried at Forrest Lawn. Henry Zip was a hugely influential member in the Masonic Insurance Company, and which was a big thing in Buffalo, New York, no longer exists, unfortunately. It was founded by Most Worshipful Fox. But he was also a huge player in Masonic aid and the Masonic Board of Relief. Henry Zip was a member of my lodge, Harmony. And a great story about Masonic friendship is he met his best friend, Henry Zip and Henry Lang. Henry Zip had his first son Henry Lang had his first son and named him Henry Zip Lang. He had a son named Henry Zip Lang Jr. Unfortunately, Brother Lang recently passed away. He was a Grand Steward of the Grand Lodge of the State of New York, but they kept the tradition between the two families going basically until they ran out of family members. Unfortunately, the last of that old line was Brother Zip, who passed well into his 90s last year. But again, they met such good friends that their sons married their daughters and cousins, and the families really became one family, so much so that they started to name their children after them. So it's pretty incredible tale. So with that comes the actual dedication of Forrest Lawn Cemetery. And believe it or not, these three people, separated through time, are connected. Red Jacket, Erastus Granger, and Most Worshipful Christopher G. Fox. So Red Jacket is one of the most famous people buried in Forest Lawn. The great Seneca orator and chief of the Wolf Clan defended his people and represented them in their councils. During the Revolution, he was a messenger for the British Army. During the War of 1812, he sided with the American Army. He was awarded a silver medal, which was presented to him by President George Washington in Philadelphia in 1792. He wore this medal proudly. It's actually held at the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society. When he died, he was the first buried in the old reservation cemetery in South Buffalo. However, his remains were removed to a secret location on the Cattaraugus Reservation in 1852, and in 1879, his remains were given to the Buffalo Historical Society by his grandniece, Ruth Stevenson. His remains, with other Seneca chiefs, were recovered from Reservation Cemetery and would be reinterred in the Red Jacket lot, Section 12 of Forest Lawn Cemetery on October the 9th, 1844. You absolutely cannot miss the memorial. It's the first thing you see when you roll into through the main gate off of Delaware. So how is this all connected? Well, we're going to get to that in a second, because I got to tell you about Erastus Granger. So Erastus Granger lived in Buffalo, New York in 1804, having recently been appointed by President Thomas Jefferson as Indian agent to Seneca Nation. In 1806, he purchased property from Captain William Johnston, which is today Forest Lawn Cemetery. So weirdly enough, he's if you find a location of his grave, it's a little picture underneath his gravestone. It's actually his front lawn. It was actually called the Old Turnip Patch. Prior to the War of 1812, through the first year, Erastus Granger's orders were to keep the Senecas neutral in the war with England. He accomplished this until the Senecas declared war on the Mohawks, who were allies to the British. On July the 10th, 1813, Granger summoned Red Jacket and other Seneca chiefs and warriors to his farm to prepare for battle. The next morning, the British attacked Black Rock, and Granger led the Senecas to a fight to repulse them. At the Battle of Black Rock on December 23rd, 1813, he led them again in defending Black Rock and Buffalo. Granger then led the Senecas during the Niagara Campaign of 1814. Granger was a close friend and ally to Red Jacket and all the Seneca people. They actually awarded him some property that is part of Forest Lawn. And their friendship was actually written about for years to come. At the time of his death, Red Jacket gave a eulogy in Seneca and openly wept at the head of the casket of his dead friend. Granger is buried again in Section J of Forest Lawn, which is called the Old Turnip Patch and was technically his front lawn. So how are we going to connect these together? Red Jacket, friends with Erastus Granger, and Serenius Chapin. Serenius Chapin was actually his personal doctor. There's actually scripts from Chapin to Red Jacket, which is kind of cool. So how are we going to connect this all together to this monument you see here? Well, and Christopher G. Fox. So it was September the 26th, 1866. It had rained heavily the day before delaying the ceremony. Several thousand people gathered to process into the new cemetery grounds. They took a path from the what would be the Delaware Gate to the spot known as Mystery Mound, where there were assembled civil leaders, politicians, clergy, gathered to give hours of speeches commemorating the event, the dedication of Forest Lawn. Behind them on the mount rested a simple granite-based stone, which you see there. The top of the stone was suspended, waiting to be lowered on a giant Lewis. A simple pillar of marble would be fixed as the monument. Copper box holding records and items placed for posterity below the stone. Deposited by the trustees of Forest Lawn by the Masons was the Holy Bible, Thomas's City Directory, the day's different Buffalo newspaper, along with other documents. The Masons placed the bylaws of the 15 Masonic lodges and organizations assembled, the Masonic Monitor, a trowel, and other Masonic items of importance. After the speeches had passed, the Masons took their place to dedicate in Masonic fashion Forest Lawn. They used a ceremony, much like the one that we used in 2016, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Leading to that ceremony was the then Right Worshipful Christopher G. Fox, District Deputy Grand Master of the 22nd Masonic District. He, 6 years from this event, would be the second Grand Master of Masons from the city of Buffalo. The different historical accounts of the dedication make the comment to the length of the brevities. I've read some historical records that the people talking before Fox just kept talking, and they being anything but brief. At the time, Right Worshipful Fox, soon did, 6 years to be Grand Master, ever eloquent, closes the ceremony in 6 simple paragraphs, an address that was no more than 5 minutes long. It was lost to history until very recently. In all likeliness, his words have not been heard in over 150 years. These are the words of Most Worshipful Christopher G. Fox. Let us hope that the petty strifes and bickering, the jealousness and burning hearts, the small triumphs and mean advantages we have gained shall not survive us, but rather the noble thoughts, the words of truth, the works of mercy and justice that ennoble and light up the existence of every honest man, however humble, will live for good when his body is moldering in its parent dust. Let us labor then, faithfully and reverently in our several vocations, true to all our duties to God and man, so that when we are called to close our earthly labors, we may be prepared for admission to the grand and solemn mysteries of the better land. These were the closing words given that day by Grandmaster Fox. Though 150 years separated us, his words ring as true as they did that day. The monument has changed. The pillar was damaged by time, removed and forgotten until the original design was found as part of my ongoing research. The grove that once surrounded the mound has been filled in for its intended purpose. So it used to be a grove, and now it's a functioning section of the graveyard. Freemasonry, ever connected to the city, has seen change too. But just as our city is in this time of renewed growth and prosperity, so too is Freemasonry. Christopher Fox was Grand Master from 1872 to 1873. So how are all these things connected? Well, known affectionately as Mystery Mound was, I can't say it in Seneca, but the name for it basically means you here before us, or here before our fathers. The mound was rumored to be used as a meeting place for the Seneca chiefs. So when Granger called a meeting of the chiefs, it was likely at this mound. So the conversation to not get involved in the war or to side with the Americans was likely held on this mound. The mound that was used to be the dedicatory site for basically the cornerstone laying of a cemetery. It's connected throughout time through Red Jacket, through Granger, and now through Most Worshipful Fox. Very, very, very interesting connection of tales and how history kind of transcends all things, and especially Masonic history connects all these periods. Let's get you there. So I showed you lots of pictures. So this is the locations of the different sites. So section 21 is the chapel. Directly across from the chapel is the dedicatory marker or mystery mound. At the front gates, you see one there. That's the Delaware entrance. That is the spot of section 13, the Masonic section, and then the memorial and gravesite to Red Jacket. And then just to show you, we did a rededication with Most Worshipful Jeffrey M. Williamson, September the 26th, the 150th anniversary of the cornerstone or the memorial marker at Forrest Lawn. It was a beautiful day. You can see me at the bottom there giving, weirdly enough, parts of what I just told you were parts of the speech that I gave. So we kept to history. A district deputy gave a speech at Forrest Lawn along with the Grand Master, Most Worshipful Williamson. You can see there him on the hill doing the trial work for the rededication. You can see Most Worshipful Gilbert talking to Grand Master Williamson. And then, of course, you can see the crowd in front of the Delaware Gate and then the procession that we had. So it was an amazing event. It was an amazing rededication, and it was really, really well attended and really impacted the Western New York community. That wasn't that long ago. So let's tie it up with a major event in Western New York history, in American history, and in Buffalo Freemasonry, the Pan-American Exposition. This is one of those things that I do not think people outside of Western New York have a full appreciation for or even know what it is. So the Pan-American Exposition was a World's Fair held in Buffalo, New York from May the 1st, 1901 to November the 2nd. So it wasn't even really that long. The fair occupied 350 acres of what would become parts of Delaware Park and then parts of Forest Lawn and then residential communities. It is now really kind of on the edge of the park, but it's more complicated than that when you see the modern map. You can kind of see what it is on there where the streets and everything were laid out. So it is remembered today as primarily being the location of the assassination of an American president, which we're going to talk about because it's all, of course, he was a Mason and it's all Masonically connected. But it's also one of the first places that the functioning light bulb was there. Though it was unveiled in the Chicago World's Fair, it had never been used like it had at the Pan American Exposition. At night, it lit up. And that is very much why Buffalo is known as the City of Light, because of Pan American Exposition, and then Buffalo being one of the first cities in the world to have functioning electricity as a mainstay because of our proximity to the Niagara Power Escarpment. So, how do we connect all these things? Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at this is the map of modern Buffalo over where the Pan Am was. So of course we rip a freeway through the whole thing that divides residential from the park that once connected it. It's a very Buffalo thing to do. But there's parts of this that are like parts of the art museum, and that are parts of Delaware Park now, and it all got separated. But you can kind of get an idea of just how absolutely massive the Pan Am was. So let's connect this to Masonry. Here are two people, Most Worshipful Thomas Penny and Brother Conrad Diehl. So you see the little harmony mark, that means he's German. And he was a member of Harmony Lodge. So Conrad Dial was the mayor of the city of Buffalo from 1898 to 1901. He was born in Buffalo, July the 17th, 1843. He graduated from the University of Buffalo with a medical degree in 1866. On May the 5th, 1869, he married his first wife in New York City, and sadly she died in 1888. He then remarried in 1892 to Lois Maston, head of nurses at Buffalo General Hospital. He was a doctor and worked at Buffalo General Hospital, so some things never change with doctors. From 1870 to 1878, he was a surgeon and major of the 65th Regiment of New York National Guard. And from 1874 on, he was either attending or consulting physician at Buffalo General Hospital. Dial was elected as mayor of Buffalo November the 2nd, 1897, as a Democratic candidate. In 1898, an amendment to the extending to the mayor's term to 4 years was adopted. During his term, the world would see the first successful generation and transmission of electricity by the Niagara Power Plant. In addition, the city was in the throes of preparing for the Pan American Exposition. Mayor Dial had formally invited President McKinley to the exposition. You actually see that picture? That's him writing the letter that would personally invite McKinley to Buffalo. Sadly, he was struck down in an assassination, which we're going to talk about. And Dr. Diehl did not run for re-election. A lot of his personal papers basically say he was a pretty broken man after the assassination. He had basically instigated the visitation by the president and some of the organization that went around it, and it ended up becoming a great big burden on him. So after his turn, he returned to private practice, and he died quietly February the 20th, 1918. He was well known in Masonic circles, being a longtime member of Harmony Lodge. Grand Master Thomas Penny. He was the Erie County District Attorney, and in 1901, he successfully prosecuted President McKinley's assassin, Leon Chilgaz. I hope I said that right. In New York. He was a very famous corporate attorney. He was also a member of Washington Lodge number 240 and Grand Master of Masons, 1917 to 1917 to 1919. So he was actually his jewel and I believe his apron are still held by the now Renaissance Lodge. So his stuff is still poking around. I actually, in my Masonic collection, have a book from him. I believe it was a monitor that was part of his personal use that was gifted to me from I believe it was then Washington Lodge. So that's how that all connects. Brother Dial sends a personal invitation to William McKinley. William McKinley comes to the Pan American Exposition, and bad things happen. So, full disclosure, the next two brothers we talk about are not buried in Forrest Lawn, but are part of amazing history that connect everything to the Pan Am and to the brothers buried in Forrest Lawn. So, William McKinley, the 25th President of the United States, was shot on the grounds of the Pan Am Exposition at the Temple of Music in Buffalo, New York on September the 6th, 1901. only 6 months into his second term. He was shaking hands when an anarchist, Leon Shelgaj, shot him twice in the abdomen. McKinley died on December the 14th of gangrene caused by the wounds. He was the third American president to be assassinated, following Abraham Lincoln in 1865 and James Garfield in 1881. McKinley enjoyed meeting the public, and he was reluctant to accept the security available to his office. Secretary to the President, George B. Cortlyol, feared that an assassination attempt would take place during the visit to the Temple of Music and took it off his schedule twice, but McKinley kept putting it back on. Why did Leon become an anarchist and attempt to assassinate the president? He assassinated the president. He lost his job during the economic panic of 1893 and turned to anarchism, a political philosophy adhering to by recent assassinations of foreign leaders. He had regarded McKinley as a symbol of oppression and was convinced that it was his duty as an anarchist to kill him. He was unable to get near the president during his earlier visits. You can see the where he's talking in front of the gates, and then you can see the canopy he was under. But shot him twice as he reached to shake hands in the reception line at the temple. So you see that picture of McKinley walking up the stairs. That's actually him entering. I believe he gets assassinated on his way out. He gets assassinated on his way in. So this is him walking into the building. And there's another picture I couldn't fit into the frame, but he gets into the Temple of Music and is basically assassinated in the hallway leading up to his seat as he's shaking people's hands. McKinley initially appeared to be recovering, but took a turn for the worst on the 13th of September when his wounds became gangrenous and he died the next morning. So, another fun thing, his assassin was the first to, oddly enough, be killed by the electric chair, which Congress passed special legislation to do. And then they, I believe, created the Secret Service out of his assassination as a formal bodyguard for the president. But my presidential history gets a little fuzzy there. I just think it's interesting that the city that first has electricity creates legislation to electrocute a guy with electricity for execution with electricity. It just kind of shows you how things connect. So Teddy Roosevelt becomes the president. The first inauguration of President Theodore Roosevelt, our brother, as the 26th president of the United States took place on Saturday, September the 14th, 1901, at the Ainsley Wilcox House. It's located at 641 Delaware Ave in Buffalo, New York, following the death of President William McKinley. The inauguration, the fifth non-scheduled extraordinary inauguration to ever take place, and the first in the 20th century, marked the commencement of the first term, only 3 years, 171 days in, and then Theodore Roosevelt as president. John R. Hazel, U.S. District Judge for Western District of New York, administered the presidential oath of office in the library of the Wilcox House. Of course, in true Teddy Roosevelt fashion, when asked whether he was ready to take the oath, he answered, "I will take the oath, and in this hour of deep and terrible national bereavement, I wish to state that it shall be my aim to continue, absolutely without variance, the policy of President McKinley for the peace and honor of our beloved country." After his response, Judge Hazel administered the oath of office. The Wilcox House still stands in Buffalo. It is an awesome museum. And you can actually see the two pictures that was taken the day of the inauguration, and then next to it, though, I mean, I guess I'm lying. It's not technically present day because it's snowing in Buffalo, but if you went there on a nice day, that's what it would look like. They recently did restoration to the front of the house. The museum and meeting space in the Wilcox House is awesome. It is one of those gems of American history that is so well preserved and tells the story of not just the Pan American Exposition, but the inauguration of President Roosevelt and the assassination of McKinley. If you're in Buffalo, it is way worth your time to visit it, because it is, again, one of those weird things that exist that I don't think people ever think to even look up or even go to. But it's something locals know about, and we've had Masonic meetings in there. We've had district meetings. We've had tour groups. It's a blast. It's really a well-maintained part of the National Park System, which is another thing. It's part of the National Park System. It's not just a random thing. So definitely, when you're in the area, let me know when you're going. I'll go with you. So where are these things located? Conrad Dial's grave is located at Section 8, and Grandmaster Penny is located in Section A. Both of their grave markers are actually pretty small. When we first started doing these, we thought it would be impossible to find enough Masons to do a presentation. So I and Brother Chapin, who's a past master of Harmony Lodge, and a good friend of mine from high school, see, the world always connects. We decided to go to Forrest Lawn and just look for squares and compasses on graves and then Google their names and see what we could find. I will only tell you that that was a horrible approach because there were so many that we couldn't figure it out. So we ended up using that information to then kind of connect the dots in some of Penner's work, and then some of the historic members that were figures in Buffalo, and then connected more dots. And eventually I get you to this story that we share today. So I know it was a little long, but I'm excited and it's a great story to tell. So this is my beautiful city, Buffalo, New York. That's our beautiful city hall, the largest municipal building in the United States. You see the building with the two Statue of Liberties way off in the distance there? That is the Liberty Bank building, originally the German National Bank. That is the first site of Harmony Lodge's meetings. If you cross over and you see that tower across from it, that with the radio, that's the Rand building. He was the president of of Marine Midland Trust Company. He would donate the Rand mansion to the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, and they would occupy the Delaware mansion for about 35 or 40 years before the Depression caused a tax problem. Adjacent to that, you'll see a white building with lit up lights. That's the tower, or that's the natural gas building. It was modeled after the Tower of Light. And across from that is the Buffalo Savings Bank building, now known as the Gold Dome, one of the offices of the M&T Bank. It was modeled after the Temple of Music and where McKinley was assassinated. If you're ever in Buffalo, I also give a walking tour, which will tell you all about the cool Masonic stuff located in downtown Buffalo. So with that, my brothers, brings the end to this historic retelling of the history of early Masonry in Western New York. I know that was a lot, I'm sorry, but it's a cool story. And that's only up to 1919. It gets crazier after that, especially with the things that have happened really in the last 45 or 50 years, when we saw the crazy booms in membership and the rapid opening of lodges and influence of immigrant communities on Masonry. So with that, my brothers, I am open to questions.
Brother Dan, let me just ask you one quick question before I lose my internet. I have a very spotty connection tonight. Brother Dennis Brooker asked this earlier in the chat room. Do you use any family ancestry records that are available now to figure out the history of what Freemasonry in New York?
Yeah, I do. So Buffalo is blessed to have the Buffalo Historical Society. It's actually located in the state building. That was the only permanent building built for the Pan Am. They have amazing records. So once you find the breadcrumbs of whatever it is you're looking for, my advice is start in two places. If it's Masonic history, look to the Proceedings of Grand Lodge, because that's like the record of everything Grand Lodge. And Harvard has searchable ones, and of course you can always ask the Grand Lodge Library, and we have copies that are you can look at. So that'll let you punch down their Masonic information. Newspapers, because it's free and you don't have to pay for that, and most newspapers are actually searchable these days. And then of course if you want to get on paying for things, their Ancestry, I believe I've used it in the past, but it does have a researcher's option where you can use it to kind of punch down family histories and information on different members. Graveyards, as wacky as it sounds, keep good records. I've used records at Masonic graveyards in Western New York to track down a ton of historical information just through burial records, because they have to be kept. So it allows you to find family ties, it allows you to find relations to people, just tons of information.
Brother Di Natale, not necessarily a question, but an observation, which I guess could become a question. I noticed quite a few brothers in the chat when you started speaking said, wow, I wish somebody would talk about some of the cemeteries in Albany or in, my jurisdiction or my area. How, besides having a passion for history and, going through and seeing the beauty and the wonder of the gravestones and the dates and the men and the women that are buried and trying to put it all together, How do you recommend that a brother would get started if they wanted to do their own Living Stones project?
So my advice is to look to the members of the historic record of your lodge. Truthfully, when I guess I can tell you why we even started doing this. Harmony, my lodge, had a renaissance about 15 years ago, and God's honest truth, we didn't know anything about our history. The old timers didn't even talk about it. We found those jewels in the apron I told you about, and then we found a picture with it of the founding members, and we're like, cool, who are these guys? And we started Googling and started looking things up and started to find that these men weren't just Masons, they're people, and they existed in our communities. And as we learned more about who they were, where they were buried, really kind of started with being able to do dedications and whatnot, because it's important to know where our brothers are buried. But it reinnervated the quest for our history and our identity. Like even where our lodge name came from. I recently found that in old records of the lodge and was able to string together that the old German lodges all named themselves after something. They did it on purpose because the German community was super tight. They weren't started as like rivals to the other. It was looked at as a cohesive community. So to start, one, my advice would not be to go to the graveyard and just start looking at people's names, because that did not work for me. My advice would be to look at your founding members or members that are famous or have history in that area, and then just start digging into that onion, because they're connected. We connected the story of Erastus Granger, Serenius Chapin, and Red Jacket through a Buffalo History Gazette that gave a picture of the script to Red Jacket and then mentioned that Chapin was a Mason. Brother Chapin, who I said we did this initial research with, that's like his great-great-granduncle, and his family had been trying to establish his Masonic membership for years. I found it mentioned in a record, and then in an old book no one had looked at, and then went and looked at the primary source, and there it was, plain as day. He was the first senior ward. So these things all connect. And when they do, you're going to find that it re-energizes your not just your love of your community, but really your place in Masonry that is timeless, because people are going to be looking at your history just like we're looking at their history 100 years from now, because that's what we are. We walk on this backdrop of history. That's what Freemasonry is. In a lot of respects, we're a time capsule shooting through space that connects so many things. And those brothers' story are not that much different than our story, but it tells us where we came from and how we are the way we are. A convoluted way to answer that question, but I hope it did.
If I also may add that something that you mentioned, Brother Dan, about finding that apron balled up in a locker in your lodge, I think it speaks to so many of us, because so many of our lodges, we have these little hidden jewels and treasures buried away, tucked away in some closet, and it's incumbent upon our generation to make sure that we locate these items and don't toss them away. Take the time. In fact, we're going to be doing a program another month or two where there are actual steps that brothers should be doing within their own lodges to make sure that they're preserving the history of their lodges in Freemasonry for future generations. With that, I will thank you, Brother Dan, so very much. You used earlier about you're connected. My mother lodge is actually called Golden Rule Claremont McKinley Lodge number 486, and is a conglomeration of 4 lodges. One lodge, McKinley Lodge, was formed following the assassination of President McKinley. These are lodges in New York City. Thank you so much once again, Brother Dan. What a wonderful evening. Thank you for not only tonight, but for all that your hard work in the past, in the present, and certainly your work yet to come. Through your work, you are ensuring that our history will not only be remembered, but celebrated and cherished. And I hope it is becoming a call to arms for all of us, for each of our brothers and each of our lodges, to do what we can to identify, preserve, and protect our special stories. Our brothers, at each of our Craftsman Online programs, we have been honored to call upon a Grand Chaplain, special men who bring us closer to the great architect of the universe. Tonight was no different. I thank you, Grand Chaplain Right Worshipful John Califano, for leading us in prayer this evening and for the spiritual guidance you share with your brothers every day. My brothers, please mark your calendars for another Reading Room program on March 21st. God bless you, my brothers. God bless our country, and God bless our gentle craft. Good night.